Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. In this video, we're going to go over ECMAScript modules, commonly abbreviated as ES modules in JavaScript. We're actually just going to call them modules. So what are modules? They're actually a way for us to split up our code into multiple files and then kind of import them and export them from multiple places. Up until now, we've only really been working with one file at a time. So in order for us to actually be able to build more robust and complex programs, we're going to need to be able to not only have multiple files for our code, but also be able to actually import code from other people's files for things that we don't really want to write or things that other people are much better at writing than we would be. For example, once we start working with front-end technologies, we might end up importing libraries like React that will help us build websites. We might end up importing libraries that will actually help us with databases, many different things that these libraries can do. They can do very small things. They can also do a huge amount of work for us. So we need to actually figure out how to get code from over here into our file so that we can actually use it. So let's take a look at how that works with modules. Okay, so I kind of gave a bit of preamble as to how this actually works. So the point of this module business is to actually allow us to separate and organize our code. That really is one of the main points. As I mentioned, up until now, everything we have done has been in one file. That works for really, really small programs, but as we actually want to build more robust and complicated programs, that's just not going to cut it for us. So we're going to really need a way to actually split up our code into multiple folders, multiple files, and have a nice organization hierarchy so that we can actually figure out what is happening in what part of our code very easily, because once we get past a few hundred lines of code, it becomes pretty unwieldy. Another important aspect of this is that it makes it really easy to share our code with others. Imagine if you were to write a bunch of functions that are able to do something super cool, and you want to share it with your friends, right? Or share it with other developers. What usually ends up happening is we package these things up into these things called modules, and then other developers or our friends would be able to actually just kind of import those files, which we'll see in a second, and they can kind of just start using them right away. Another really important part of this is that we can actually only bring in the parts of the code that we actually need. So for example, maybe the code that our friend wrote does a whole bunch of things and we only need to use one or two functions inside of there. We can actually only bring in that piece of code to make our program more efficient and run a bit faster. Also, this really is a separate topic, but I do want to mention it here. It keeps our code logically separate, which it comes to this topic of scope, which I know I've hinted out multiple times so far. It is quite a complex topic, but now that I've hinted at it enough times and we can see how modules work, eventually I'll be able to make a code on scope specifically and topics related to it like closure. But for now, just keep that at the back of your mind that it does help deal with scope, and I'll kind of mention it a couple times throughout the video. One kind of newer feature that is possible with modules as well is we're able to dynamically import code. Now this sounds super fancy and it's a little bit nutty, and we're not really going to go over it right now because it's really, really new and we're going to need to kind of find a real use case for it. But effectively, we can kind of think about conditionally pulling in code as we need it from different things like libraries and other kind of repositories all over, whether it's the internet or our computer. So let's not worry about that for now. We're really going to focus kind of on these parts right here, which is kind of separating, organizing the code, and then importing and exporting it and how that functionality works so that we can actually start using it ourselves with our code. And then once we start doing that, we can start to understand how it works when we actually pull in other people's code. So let's get right into it. Okay, so for most of these slides, what I have is kind of two files simulated here, and we're actually going to write these files together in VS Code in a second, but just so it's a bit easier to read, I kind of had the left-hand side of the screen and the right-hand side of the screen, and these are meant to be two separate files, right? So for example, on the left-hand side, I have a monkey.js file, and on the right-hand side, I have a jungle.js file. Okay, so this is all the code inside of monkey.js, and then likewise, this is all the code inside of jungle.js. Okay. So let's take a look at monkey.js first. So monkey.js has an object, okay? We have an object called monkey here, and its name is Abu, species is cappuccino, and hobbies are stealing right now, maybe many other hobbies. We also have a function in here, and this function is called printMonkey, and all it does is log out monkey.name. So that's this monkey right here, and the name property right here, which is going to be Abu. Okay, so here's a new piece of code that we need to realize. I want you to think about this. if we don't have something like modules, right? How would we be able to get access to monkey or print monkey inside another one of our files, right? If you really think about it, there isn't really a way that we have right now to actually do that, right? Which is why we've been writing all of our code in one file so far. So to really fix this problem and kind of bridge this gap between files, there's this module system. Okay, so what we can do is use these keywords to allow these bridges to form between different files so that we can actually get stuff from one place to another very, very easily. So what are those names? So here we have an export keyword, okay? This is a specific keyword built into JavaScript, and it's reserved for this use, very similar to like for and while and like all those reserved words like const, right? This is a reserved word that we can use, and following it, we can put what looks like an object, okay? The only difference is that inside of this object, we don't put keys and values, we only put kind of one thing at a time. So I'll show you how we can export multiple things shortly, but for now, you can think of reading this line as saying, I want to export this variable print monkey outside of this monkey.js file, okay? So if I do this, this is called a named export because we are using the name of the variable inside of this object looking thing to export out of monkey.js, okay? So the flip side to this is the jungle.js file. We need a way to actually pull in print monkey inside of jungle.js, okay? So the way that we do that, kind of the partner to export is import, as you can probably imagine, okay? So the syntax for that, for a named export, looks like this. We have import, and then we have the kind of object looking syntax, except we only have I guess you can think of it as a key, in this case, the variable that we're importing from monkey.js, which is print monkey. And over here, we have this from, and then this string. Okay, so we'll go over this a little bit more, but effectively for now, what we need to know is that this is going to be a file name. Okay, later on, we can import from other things that are not file names, but for now, we'll stick to file names. Now, we can't just do monkey.js because that actually means something different. So we actually have to put this / specifier before it. Now, this is not something specific to JavaScript. / means inside the current folder. So what this is saying is, hey, jungle.js, look inside the current folder and find a monkey.js file and then import print monkey that's exported from monkey.js. Okay, so we'll see that shortly. But if we do this, that effectively bridges these two files, at least when it comes to the print monkey variable. So we can do things inside of here like we normally could. Like, for example, we can log welcome to the jungle. But then if we actually use print monkey, which is a function, right? Recall that this is a function that we're importing, and we call that function, it will actually execute the code inside of here, right? And we're going to log out Abu because it's logging out monkey.name, which is also from this file. So not only do we have access kind of to the functions that are exported, for example, or any objects that we might export, we actually have kind of this, you can think of it as like variable state is kept track of by all this module system for us. Okay, so the monkey object is kind of just exists in memory, and print monkey has access to it, and we can grab stuff out of it, even though we don't have access to monkey over here. Okay, so that is kind of confusing. So let's look at an example just to kind of really hammer this. So I'm going to open up VS Code. I'm going to create my jungle.js file. Just keep it a similar example and just add a little bit to it just so it's consistent with the slides. And I'm also going to create a monkey.js. Okay, so just to save us some time, I'm going to copy my monkey object here. I encourage you to type this out. I'll just shorten this a little bit so it takes up less space on the screen. So we have const monkey. It's going to point to this object with 3 properties: name of Abu, species of capuchin, and hobbies, which is an array of strings, in this case, just stealing. Okay, really nice monkey. Now, we want to create that function, right? So we'll say const print monkey, and this is going to be a regular function. And all it's going to do is one thing, which is print out the name. So I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to say monkey.name. So this is nothing new for us, right? In fact, if I pull up my console or my terminal, sorry, make sure I'm in the correct folder, I'm going to run node and I'm going to run monkey.js. we'll see nothing because I don't actually call this function. But if I call this function, what we'll see is a boo being printed out, right? So nothing really special going on here. We've seen this before a million times. Okay, now the point of this is I want to be able to do this, line 11, but inside jungle.js. I can't do that right now, right? I can't do print monkey like this, right? If I try to do this and I run node jungle.js, I'm going to get print monkey is not defined, right? Because if you look at this, it's definitely not defined, right? Like we don't have access. Like there's no print monkey in here, right? We can't call a function that is not defined because it's not defined kind of like up here, right? We're not creating the print monkey function. It's in another file. So we need to let JavaScript know that this print monkey function does exist, but it's not in this file, it's in another file, all right? So we need to export this print monkey function so that other files can get access to it. And that's where we use this export keyword. For now, we're going to use named export, which is just this syntax of the curly brackets. And then inside of here, I'm going to put print monkey. I can also put monkey if I want, right? And I'll show you what that'll look like in a second, but we'll keep it simple to start. So I'm saying take this variable, which is pointing to this function in memory, and export it. So now what I can do is I can say import, and I can do set of curly brackets, and I can do from. I'll put the name inside the curly brackets in a second. And here I put a string. So it's always importing something from a file, right? Importing something from somewhere. And we can't just do monkey.js because this technically means something different when it comes to modules. So we have to put a /, okay? And that means look in the current folder. So in this folder right here, which all our files are in right now, and find monkey.js, and then grab the exports from monkey.js so I can pull them out into this object right here. So inside here, I can actually grab print monkey, just like this. Okay. And now if I run this code, we'll actually get an error, which we'll fix in a second. But if I run jungle.js, what we'll see is that we're going to get cannot use import statement outside of a module. Now, this is unique to Node.js, okay? Keep in mind that right now we are using Node.js to run JavaScript. Now, this is a bit tricky to explain, so I'll do my best at a simple level. These modules came out after the ability to move these variables between files concept did. So there was an older version and an even older version before that of being able to transfer these things between files. And quite frankly, it was very hacky. So for example, in Node.js specifically, we would do something like const print monkey equals, and then we have this special function that magically is defined for us. And we would say like require, and then we would give it like monkey.js or something like this, right? And this was before we had import and export from natively built into the JavaScript language. So this thing only worked in Node.js and it was not part of JavaScript. So after ES modules came out, a lot of people moved over to this system because it's kind of standardized and it works everywhere and it's not specific to Node. So this is not going to work, for example, in the browser. It's not going to work in things that are not Node. So it's eventually going to get phased out. And this syntax is technically called common.js. And this is traditionally called ES modules or just modules. Okay. So ES is ECMAScript, which is technically JavaScript. Okay. So let's just comment this one out for now. And by default, Node expects imports to work like this. So we have to tell it, please turn off your common.js kind of brain and turn on your ES module brain so that you can just use this new syntax, because the default, since we're using Node, is this common.js syntax. Okay, so to do that, we kind of have to do a little bit of funkiness. So over here on the left-hand side, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this file something very specific. We're going to make use of this file a lot going forward, especially as we start building larger applications, but I'm going to call this package.json, JSON. Okay. Now this is a special file that specifically Node is looking for to kind of configure itself. Inside of this is what's called a JSON file, or JavaScript object notation. We're going to go over that in much more detail as we actually get to things like the front end and even some back end work. But for now, let's just put an object in here. Okay, so curly brackets. And we have to have strings as the keys in JSON. We can't kind of leave them without the strings. So here, I'm going to put type, colon, and then I'm going to put module. So this is a string, colon, and then this is a string as module, okay? And this is all within this object, okay? So what this is gonna do is when we run our code, Node is gonna look at this package JSON file and it's gonna be like, oh, okay, you told me to turn off my common.js functionality and use the module syntax, which is gonna allow us to use export and then import instead of using require. Now there's a bit more to it than that, but for now, that's all we really need to know to kind of move forward. So now that we've done that and we have this type module in here and we have our import and our export here, let's try to run our jungle.js file again. So I'm going to run node jungle.js and check it out, right? We get Abu printed out. All that for our friend Abu, but trust me, it's definitely worth it once you get the hang of it, and it's much faster than what we just did eventually. So just to recap, make sure you have this if you're using Node. Eventually, they might get rid of this in the future, but for now, we need this in here because the default is common.js. That is going to allow us to use export. That's going to allow us to use import, and then we're good to go off to the races. We can use export and import in all of our files, and we can create these bridges. Perfect. Okay, so if we look at this result, Abu, this is going to execute print monkey, which came from here, right? And that's going to execute console log monkey.name, which is this, which is name Abu. So we're going to log out Abu. Perfect. Okay. Whew, that was a lot. So let's keep going with this. Actually, let me just show you one more thing here. We can actually export multiple things. Okay, so I can do print monkey, comma, and then the other thing I want to export. So I can export monkey as well, if I want to, right? If I didn't export monkey, I wouldn't have access to monkey to be imported. It would be hidden from me. Okay, so now I'm exporting both of these things, and if I want to, I don't have to, but if I want to, I can also import monkey. And if I do a console.log of monkey here, we'll see that I actually get the entire monkey object, which is great. If I don't import monkey, even if it's exported, I'm gonna get an error, right? Which is monkey is not defined, which makes sense because we did not import it. Okay, cool. There we go. So let's keep going with this. So it turns out that there's some nice to haves that kind of come with this module syntax. So if we want, this slide changed very little. If you didn't see the change, I don't blame you. We can actually change the name of the export if we want, right? So inside of this syntax right here, right after the thing we want to export, we can do an as and then the name that we want to export as. And then we have access to that new name inside of the import side. Right? We can't use the old name anymore because it has been effectively renamed as a new variable. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So here, if I go to my monkey.js, I'm going to say export print monkey as PM. Okay, and this is saying take this variable but rename it for the import side as this new variable. So it's an alias. And now if I try to run this code without actually using that new alias, what we'll see is that the requested module does not provide an export named print monkey, which makes sense, right? Because we didn't export print monkey, we exported print monkey as PM. So we actually have to import PM like this. And then now I can use PM as the actual import. And now if I run this, we get the correct answer and we can actually use that function. Perfect. So kind of the flip side to this is we can actually do the renaming on the import side if we want. So I'll show you that real quick. So imagine we didn't change the name over here, but for example, imagine we had something else called print monkey in our jungle.js file, right? Or you just didn't like the name print monkey, right? You can rename it on this side as well if we want to, right? So in this case, we're renaming it as the same thing, but you can see that that's not happening on the export side. So if we were to import this in another file, technically we could use the print monkey name in that other file if we wanted to. So this is happening on the import side. Okay, so let's take a look at this really quick. So if I change this from no longer exporting print monkey here like that, on the export side. Now, if I run this, we're going to get an error, right? Because PM is no longer there. But if I say import print monkey as PM now, right, on the import side, so the flip side, and I run this, now it works again. Okay, so we can do it either on the export, which is going to make it mandatory for everybody who's importing it in every single file, or we can just do it in one file at a time in the import side. And this is to prevent things like name clashes or just make it easier to type out if you want a shorter name. Okay. Now, there's another concept that comes with exports, because until now, what we've been seeing is the named export, right? So we are exporting the actual name itself. But it turns out we can actually do something a little bit different. Now, this is a bit strange, so I'll show this to you in a couple ways. In this case, we have another keyword being added. So instead of using the curly brackets, kind of object-looking syntax to do this export, we're actually doing a export default and then a name. Okay, and this name still has to exist within this file. So what does this mean? This allows us to provide, as it kind of sounds like, a default export. We can only have one of these in a file at a time. We cannot have more than one default export, and you'll see why in a second. This just makes it kind of easier, quote unquote, or it makes it very obvious what the main kind of export from a file is, and it also allows renaming as well. So make sure that there's only one of these in a file, and then everything else can still be a named export alongside the default export, but we can only have this one default export. And this is because a lot of files might have something that's kind of like the main point of the file that's going to be exported, and that's kind of the default or main export. Okay. Traditionally, I don't like to use this as much because I like to be very explicit with my export names, but sometimes you'll see this used, and many libraries that are very popular do use this, like I keep mentioning React, for example, is a good example of that. Okay, so if I wanted to say default export, let's just say print monkey, and I want to export monkey still normally, I can say export default, which is a keyword, print monkey, just like that. Okay, so here I have two exports. I'm exporting as a named export, monkey, and then I'm exporting as a default, and I can only have one of these, print monkey. You can imagine I can have many other variables over here, right? If I had many other variables I wanted to export that were named exports, but I can only have the one default export. Okay, and we can't rename this on this side. We'll have to rename it on the import side. So the way that we actually import this is we can't import it like this anymore. So we're going to say import, and then I'm just going to say, I'll just leave a placeholder here for now, from, and then /monkey.js. So here we just put the name that we want to import directly. So here it's going to be print monkey, and I can do print monkey just like that. And now if I run this code, we'll see that we get the same result. So notice here we don't have the curly brackets anymore. Okay, and you can now hopefully see why this is the only allowed to be one thing. We can't kind of do this syntax where we can import, for example, monkey. Okay, we can have only one default export, and then everything else needs to be in the curly brackets as named exports. So in this case, everything that's named can kind of come in here in commas, comma separated within this object, but we can only have this one default export out here. Okay, it turns out if we want to rename this, we can do it like this. So I can say import PM and rename it directly here, and I can do PM just like this. And this works only for the default export, where we can kind of rename it on the fly in this syntax. Okay, if we do it in here, for example, I have to say as moonkey, right? Just like that. I can do that if I want. So I can do console.log, and I can say moonkey. And if I do this, clear out my console, we can see that we still get our monkey object. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So only one default export, but we can rename it on the import side just like this, outside of the curly brackets. I'll go through kind of one more thing before I show an alternative to this. So There is a slightly different syntax that you will sometimes see, which is this one right here. So we looked at this top version for the default export. Technically speaking, default is actually the name of the export. So we can also use it in this way, right? We can say import default as, and then the name from monkey.js. And these two lines are functionally the same. Okay, we're using the keyword name default, and then we have to rename it here as PM. Okay, traditionally, you'll probably see this syntax used for a default export, and then the curly brackets for everything that's a named export, but sometimes you'll see it show up this way. So I just wanted to show that to you for sake of completion, just so it makes sense when you see it. Okay, so one other thing to keep in mind is that technically speaking, in a lot of code, what you'll see is people will do stuff like this. They'll say export const, for example, tiger, and we'll say is Raja, right? So if I do this, this is going to work, right? I can actually export this directly on one line. I don't actually have to do it here at the bottom. So if I go to jungle, I can import Raja. So let's see. So I'll say Raja, and then I'll console.log, and this should work. And I get import monkey as monkey and Raja. Export const, oh, tiger, I didn't name it correctly. Tiger, there you go. Tiger. Names always get me tripped up. So there we go. So that works, right? Now, you will see this pop up. I really don't like this syntax. And that's because traditionally, especially when you come to really large files, the kind of standard that you'll see most of the time is the imports are going to happen at the top of the file, and then the exports are all going to happen at the bottom of the file. It's really easy as a developer to be able to quickly look at the top, see what's being imported, go to the bottom and see what's being exported. And for example, if I had that error before where I tried to import, for example, Raja here, and if I just save this, you'll see I'll get the error. But like, oh, okay, this is not an export. I need to go to monkey.js and find what the export name is, right? If it's hidden amongst a whole bunch of other code like this, imagine that there's hundreds of lines, it becomes really confusing to find. So if it's all just neatly tucked at the bottom with all the named exports and then maybe a default export, it's really easy to figure out. So to do that, we would do this. We just take the export out here, and then we would put it over here, right, alongside monkey, and now we can import tiger, and we get our tiger printed out. Okay, so just a kind of note there to keep in mind. Now, a lot of people have very strong opinions about this. That's just my opinion. Hopefully the logic makes sense to you. You can kind of do whatever you want for your own projects. And if you're on a team, hopefully they're using kind of what I mentioned, but maybe they use that other method. So maybe you can ask them, why it is they prefer that. Okay. Cool. Now, I just want to show this other example here. So what's interesting about modules is that everything inside of a module is still a real JavaScript object. And if we start changing it, whether it's from our jungle.js file or another file, right, it's actually going to change for everybody, like globally in every single file, which is exactly what we want actually. Sometimes this can cause issues, but most of the time this is what we want because we want there to be one consistent state that we can update from any other file. So let's take a look at this. Let's go to monkey and let's just say that let's add an age to our monkey, right? And he started 10. Then let's just inside print monkey. So if I say when we print monkey, we're gonna just take our monkey.age and we're gonna add 1 to it. Okay. Every time we print out monkey, and then I'm going to print out the whole monkey object instead of just the name. Okay, so that's the change I'm going to make. I'm going to add an age property to monkey started at 10, and then every time we print monkey, we're going to add to the age, and then console.log out monkey. All right, so let's take a look at this. So we have console.log out moonkey here. I got all these names are getting confusing. Maybe I'll just get rid of that rename just so it becomes less confusing, and I'll change these here for you. We have our default export, so we're importing SPM, and then we have monkey and tiger, the named exports, right? And we can print them out. So I'm going to print out monkey before we call our PM, and note that our PM is print monkey, and it's going to increase monkey's age by 1. Okay, and then I'm going to print out monkey again. Okay, so let's take a look. Technically, I don't need to print out monkey again because we're printing it out inside of print monkey, but it's okay. So here we go. So you can see that monkey starts off with an age of 10. Then we add 1 to monkey by calling print monkey, and we're also printing out monkey again on line 7. Right? So this is coming from inside the print monkey function. So what's interesting about this is that this monkey object, right, is being updated correctly. And if we were using monkey inside another file somewhere, or even in this file, right, it would have the correct values, even though it exists inside of monkey.js, which is a totally different file. Okay, so these are living objects that exist in another file, just as if they would exist in our file. And this is not only for objects, this is for like arrays and maps and any other type of object that we want to create. So it's pretty amazing when it comes to holding state, because this state is going to be kept for us and updated consistently. Okay. Now I want to show you a couple of things kind of to wrap up this video, and these are pretty kind of nutty, and you'll see them here and there, but they're definitely less used, but it's important to kind of note how they work. So imagine that we have a bunch of exports, or in this case I only have one export, but we could have many exports from our monkey.js file or from any file. We can use this import star syntax to import everything under one object, give it a name, right? So we have to use this as, and then we can tell it which file to import from. Now, this syntax is a little bit strange because this kind of looks like the default syntax where we don't really use as, so it's special to this case of the star. But let's take a look at what happens here. Everything is going to be an object that contains all of the kind of values that are being exported as keys. Okay, so I think I might have made a mistake here actually. So I think this is actually called default. We'll see in a second. And I actually also forgot to export monkey. Made a few mistakes on this slide. So technically what we have over here is also an export. Let me just fix this really quick. Monkey, just like this, which is why we can actually import monkey in the everything object, right? It has to still be exported. We can't actually access it if it's not exported, right? So star is still looking for all the exports, but it still needs to be exported. So if we don't have something exported, it's not actually going to be imported inside of star. So let's take a look at how this actually works in practice, just to make it a bit more clear. So now in our monkey.js file, I have monkey, I have tiger, I have print monkey, and I'm exporting monkey, tiger, and then print monkey is the default. I'll get rid of tiger for now. So tiger is only inside of monkey.js. And in here, what I'll do is in jungle.js, I'm going to comment out this line right here, and I'm going to rewrite a new line. I'm going to say import star as, and I'll just call this everything for now, from /monkey.js. Okay, comment out all this code because that doesn't exist anymore. And now I'm just going to console.log out everything so that we can take a look. I think I'm going to have to fix the previous slide because I don't actually think that was correct. So yeah, so if you see this, what we have is a module object, and this is just an object. And on that object, we have the properties that we would expect. We have the default property and we have the monkey property. And this corresponds to the default here. So it's actually given the key of default, similar to if we were to use the object syntax to actually pull out the object. That's the default export. But we also have monkey, which is this object. So technically, this was wrong. This was everything.default, just like that, would actually call this function. So let's actually try that ourselves and see how this works. Okay. If I want to call print monkey, which is this function, I have to do everything.default, and I call it just like that, which is a little bit strange, but that's how that works. And if I want to console.log out monkey, and note that I don't really have monkey anywhere here. It's hidden inside of this everything object. I can do everything.monkey, and that's going to give me my monkey object. So if I run this code now, what we'll see is that our default function that's exported, which is print monkey is going to run. which is this code right here. It's going to increase the age of monkey by 1 from 10. So it's going to be 11, right? And then it's going to print it out. So when we actually run this code, we are getting this right here. We're getting age increased to 11 and then monkey being printed out. We're also able to grab monkey directly because we're exporting it and console log it out directly if we want. Okay. What we can't do is do everything .tiger, right? So if we try to do this, what we'll see is that that's undefined because there is no tiger property on this exported object. Now, this syntax is used a little bit less. We can actually use this on the export side to do something called like module aggregation, which we'll get into as we actually work with a lot of files and a lot of imports and exports. And the concept is the same, which is why I want to show it to you here on the import side, because if you can understand this, the export also makes a bit of sense. So definitely less used, but just so that if you do see it out in the wild, very similar to kind of that default key being shown, it's something that you've like, okay, I can remember what that was. All right. Even I sometimes forget this because this is less seen. So I always forget that it's the default key. Now, to wrap up kind of this video, I want to show you something completely wild. This actually blew my mind when I saw this in modules, and it just opens up a whole host of crazy awesome possibilities, which we'll get to in future videos. Before we do that, I actually realized I had a typo here, so sorry about that if you saw that on the screen. Lots of little mistakes on this slide here. Okay, so now for the crazy part, let's take a look. So here we have a top level await. So let me show you what I mean. Now on this, same as before, we have monkey.js on the left-hand side and then jungle.js on the right-hand side. We have our monkey object. I just condensed our monkey abu here into a smaller object just so I have a bit more room to show you kind of the more important part of this screen, which is this print monkey function now has been changed a little bit. Okay, so here we have a new promise being returned from this function, and this function is setting a timeout for 2 seconds, and then it's resolving with our monkey object after 2 seconds. Okay, so here is the totally crazy part. Check this out. This is not an async function, but it returns a promise. We can use await like this inside of a module. Okay, we can say result monkey is equal to await print monkey. Okay, and we can then export result monkey. Normally this would not be possible. We can't use await outside of an async function. So I want you to think of kind of the rationale for this, right? We can imagine that we would want to reach out over the internet to grab something from a server somewhere or from a database, for example, and that operation might take a few seconds, right? Very similar to if you go to Google or if you go to some other website, and it might take a few seconds to load, or the images might take some time to load. So in this case, we're doing the same thing. Imagine that we have something stored somewhere on a remote server, remote database, and we want to ask that computer, hey, please give us that file that you have or that object or resource that you have, and then we can actually provide it to be exported. So that is an asynchronous operation. That's not something that's going to be instant, right? So we're going to need to use a promise for that, right? And that's the rationale for this. We can actually use await to await something before it gets exported at the top level. And what's going to happen on the import side is we are not actually going to run that code in here until we actually resolve this import, which basically means until this promise is resolved, we're not going to run this code. And we can actually be assured that once we actually come into this code and start running it, we have access to the things that we asked for inside of the import. In this case, the thing that relied on that promise, which was asynchronous, that might take some time to come back. Now, this is totally crazy. Super, super awesome. Very, very powerful. Less used because it's very, very new to the language, but really quite powerful when it comes to actual functionality. Also, my comments are messed up here. I realized the star is on the wrong place. Hopefully you caught that, but not a big deal. So let's take a look at how this might actually work. So let's go back to our monkey.js. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take our print monkey function and turn it into something that's going to take some time and resolve with a promise. So effectively this, I'm going to say, return a new promise. And in here, I'm going to do a resolve. I'm going to do a reject, and I'm going to run this code in a second. I'm going to cut this code for a sec. I'm going to put it in a set timeout. So I'm going to do set timeout, and in here what we're going to do is I'm going to paste that code, right, which is console logging monkey after increasing monkey's age, but we are also then going to resolve with our monkey, right, so that we're actually going to set all this promise to be in a successful state so that we correctly get back this object monkey. Okay, so this needs to take a couple of seconds. I always miss this part. Let's just do 2 seconds for now, just to keep it consistent with the slides. And what we can now do is we can await this and then export it. Okay, so I can say const, I can say like awaited monkey is equal to calling our print monkey, but this is going to be a promise that we get back. And we can await that promise at the top level in this file without having an async function, which is totally wild. So now, instead of actually exporting maybe, for example, monkey directly, I can export awaited monkey. Okay. Now, this is going to run this function, which is going to return a new promise that resolves after 2 seconds. The await is going to pause this export until awaited monkey comes back, and then it's going to pass the resolve value, which is going to be monkey, right, which is this object, into awaited monkey. Okay, so try to trace that. It's definitely pretty tricky, but it should make sense once you trace the code. So over here, what I'll do is I'll kind of I'll get rid of all these logs. Actually, you know what? I'll just create another file. I'll just call this async jungle. What a cool name. And in here, I'll import from, and I'll say /monkey.js. So what do I want to import from monkey.js? I want to import awaited monkey. Okay, so I want to import awaited monkey. So then I'm going to say console.log, and I'll just say welcome to the jungle, and we'll see if this prints right away or not. And then I'll also console.log out our awaited monkey. So do note that our print monkey function is also going to be logging out our monkey here. So we'll probably see it logged twice because we're resolving with the object and then we're printing it out again. But then that should be after the age is actually incremented. Okay, so normally this would not work, right? Because we have an await here at a top level. So let's see what actually happens. And I want you to notice the delay when I actually run this. So I'm going to run node. I'll run jungle.js here. So oops, async jungle. So we can actually see how this works. So watch this carefully, and I'll run it a few times and see the actual kind of order of these printouts and how long it takes. Okay, so I'm going to run it in 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that took a couple of seconds, right? 2 seconds to be precise. So we get a printout, then we get welcome to the jungle, and then we get another printout. So this is kind of curious, right? Where is this first printout coming out? Because we don't have anything before this welcome to the jungle. Well, that is coming to us because inside of monkey.js, we're also printing out monkey. And this code has to run before we can import it as the resolved value. So we have that console log coming from line 14. And then the rest of this code is coming from our async jungle.js. Okay, so definitely pretty wild. This is another thing to actually show that all of the code inside of the module that gets imported actually does run from top to bottom when we actually import that file. So just another note to show you here, this is unrelated to async. If I just say hello and I have a random console log inside of my module here, you'll see that I actually do have that printed out, and it came first because that happened before the await. Okay, so another reason not to include random console logs out inside of your code, you want to make sure you remove them once you actually package it up into a module at some point. So a lot going on with that last example. Definitely a fancy new feature that has a lot of power to it, and we'll see examples of where it's very useful. But for now, the most important takeaways are definitely the other kind of exports, which are the named exports over here, and then the default exports that we looked at over here. That is going to be a super important concept. We're going to use this all over the place to actually connect our different files together using these import-export bridges so that we can actually modularize and split up our code to make it much more manageable and readable. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a long one. There was a lot going on. If you did, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear in the comments, did you realize that all these crazy things were part of modules? Have you been using them yourself? Have you used Require or CommonJS more? What is it about kind of this system that might still be a bit confusing? I'd love to hear, maybe make a video about it in the future as well. There's a few things that we didn't cover, like dynamic imports, for example. But overall, this is pretty much most of what we'll be seeing day to day when we're actually using our modules and importing them into our files. So what we're going to do in the next video is go over a bunch of exercises to get real practice to see how we can import and export code, just so that we can really get our hands kind of dirty and actually get practice with this before we actually start using it in our project, since there's definitely a lot of different variations as you've seen. So I can't wait to get to that video. I'll see you there.